Long haul truckers, what's the creepiest, most paranormal thing you've ever seen on the road at night? This is my father's story. He wasn't a long haul trucker, but rather an 18-year-old gas station attendant in the late 70s. And without a certain long haul trucker, I probably wouldn't be here. The gas station was 24 hours, and my dad was the only one working the night shift. 11 to 7, I think. A guy comes in and just gives him the creeps. Seems very sketchy. He was wearing tight jacket and pants and could tell he had something in his pants under the jacket. It was during the summer and was warm, so why is he wearing a jacket to begin with? It was later confirmed he was on drugs. A lot of truck drivers used this station as it was the only open one 24 hours for a long stretch of the highway. They also had a big lot where they let truckers park and sleep or take a break. On this night, at this time, it was just my dad, sketchy dude, and one trucker in there he kind of knew. As in, came in frequent enough to be conversational. And asked if he'd stay in the station and hang out until the sketchy dude left. Well, after looking at the stock shelves for several minutes while sneaking peeks at my dad behind the counter, the sketchy guy eventually looked fed up and got into his blue car and sped off. Cool trucker guy hung out with my dad a little longer, until another couple of guys came in to use the booth to eat a sandwich. I should also point out this was pretty middle of nowhere rural southeast United States and 1970s. CB and landline was it. My dad only had a landline in the store, and dad did not have any protection or weapon of any kind. So, the hours pass and my dad is shaken off the paranoia when, all of a sudden, this truck driver guy in a car comes hauling butt into the lot, jumps out, and sprints into the store hollering he needs a phone. He did not have a CB, nor did he have a phone at the other station. He also wasn't familiar with the area, and my dad's station was the first place he found. Calls 911 to report he had walked in on a gas station 40 miles back to find an attendant shot and dead. No one else around, and the only other piece of information is a blue car was speeding out of the lot when the trucker pulled in. Apparently, they eventually apprehend the guy in the blue car. My dad confirms it was sketchy dude from earlier in the night. They charge him with murder and armed robbery. To the long-haul trucker who waited around with my dad that night, thanks, and hope you're keeping it real. Also, worth adding that apparently the sketchy guy in blue car was already a bad apple who was either being looked for or on probation or something since he was in the system. When I was about 8, my family and I moved states and my dad struggled to find a job. Getting desperate after a few months, he took a job at a gas station working overnights in a terrible neighborhood. A month in, my dad's working alone one night because a coworker called out. A really sketchy looking guy comes in, looks around, and says he forgot his wallet in his car and leaves. Comes back a couple minutes later with two equally sketchy looking friends, and they immediately all split up, essentially surrounding him. My dad's getting really nervous and the guys are starting to head in this direction when he hears the bell at the door. Two cops walk in and immediately start bullcrapping with my dad at the counter. The dudes all left pretty quickly and did not buy anything. Soon as they were out of the store, the cops told my dad they saw them casing the place and it was pretty obvious he was about to get robbed. My dad calls his boss to get someone else down there with him, and his boss was just an a-hole, so he closed the door, dropped his keys in the mailbox, and had the officers walk him to his car. He said it simply wasn't worth potentially getting shot over. The next day, the a-hole boss was in the store alone because my dad quit and crappy coworker called out yet again. 3 dudes come back, robbed the store, and shot the boss. He survived, but it reaffirmed my dad's position that he did the right thing. Dad has told me this story a couple times, and each time it always weirds me out. He's not a trucker, but when he was in the military one night, him and a buddy went out to get food. About halfway into the drive down a dark road, my dad and his buddy noticed a woman in a red dress with black hair walking. My dad and his buddy found it odd because it did not seem safe and it wasn't that warm. My dad said deep down he knew stopping was a bad idea, so they drove a little more slowly to get a glimpse to see if she needed help. As they drove by, my dad and his friends both swear she has no face. Instead, there was just a black hole, as if she's been in a wreck and her face was taken off. It freaked them both out so badly, my dad floored it, and when they stopped to eat, both of them agreed they saw the same thing. Come to find out, a woman had been killed earlier that year in an accident. They were talking about it when a stranger interrupted and said, "The sightings of this woman were actually common." Okay, so here's a spook for you, and to this day I still have no idea. So, I was in the VA MD area and had a lot of work-related sites ranging from downtown Baltimore to Virginia Beach and all around. Friday wrapped up and I hit the road to some social arrangements I had made for the weekend. Spent the weekend with friends out in various parts of Virginia. Got dragged off to other places even further out. The usual weekend fun stuff. It's late Sunday night when I have to leave, or I'm not going to be able to get home in time to start my thankfully late afternoon Monday. I'm fully rested. I did not do any drinking. I'm not into drugs. On the highway at about 3 a.m., in the middle of dumb-duck nowhere between Roanoke and DC. Absolutely nobody around. I'm cruising along in the left lane simply because nobody else is here. No headlights for the past hour, no taillights either. No road lamps either. It's dark, it's mildly damp, and it's foggy. I have the music up and I'm feeling good. All is fine. And then, I just happen to look to the left and there's a dog barking at me. A German Shepherd in a car passenger seat. Somewhat blue glow from the instruments inside the car, and it's got a face to its window and it's barking its head off at me. I get a good hard look at it too, because at first my brain's not registering cop car, dummy. I'm going 90 plus in a 75. I promptly have that oh crap moment when the dog, the instruments, the white Crown Vic light bar all click in my brain after a second hard look. I put my foot on the brakes and start to slow down hard but safe, just to pull over. I even put my blinker on to start shifting lanes to the right to pull over. Because wait, there's no shoulder on the left side of the road. I look back to my left where there's still no shoulder room for another car and it's gone. No trace. I slammed my brakes and stopped in the middle of the highway, flipped on all my light bars and even looked around with my handheld spot. There was nothing. No taillights, no headlights, no engine sounds. Nothing. There are no other tire marks in the damp but mine, and I can see for a nice long distance both ways too. Nothing. My vehicle had great visibility and a lot of extra lighting, off-road SUV with the trimmings, and there's no possible way somebody pulled a sneaky, let alone drive that fast on a wet slope grass and rocks on my left side. So yep, there you have it. Ghost cop and his dog did not like me speeding, apparently. I was probably 20 years old in Vancouver, British Columbia. It was a Sunday and I just met this girl I had a super crush on at a coffee shop. We had a nice visit and I wanted to ask her out, but I chickened out. Anyways, Vancouver, it's a pretty busy city if you've not been there, but this day, it was oddly quiet. I was walking down the street and I was at the light waiting to cross the road. The light changed and the little red hand turned into "You are safe to cross, guy." At that point, I had some severe mental confusion that I've never had before. It stopped me dead in my tracks. I had this little weird debate with myself, so in my head I said, should I walk? I think so. The little man's walking, which means it's safe, right? I mean, it was the hand, which means stop, and then it's not the walking guy, so does that mean I can go? I was dumbfounded. Then I debated the red-green aspect. I said to myself, the light was red, but now it's green. Green means go, and the little man's going, so I should be able to go. Now, I'm not a rule follower type, as there was almost no traffic, so I would have never had this insane debate with myself. I would have simply looked both ways and crossed the street, but instead, I had this weird internal confusion. Once I decided I could cross, I took one step onto the intersection and a Suburban ran the red light, speeding through the intersection. It was like they're being chased by the cops, but there were no cops. I would have been right in front of the car if I had not been confused by the lights. 100% dead. Another story. I used to deliver candy and vending machines as a job. I was on Vancouver Island, and basically, there's only one road that connects most of it. I was coming from Victoria and going up island. Anyways, I was coming up to the summit off the road and just sort of cresting the hill, I heard this massive bang. It was the loudest bang I've ever heard in my life, and there was this massive cloud of dust in front of me. I naturally slowed down to a crawl, then the dust was moving, in this weird pattern, and the cloud directly in front of my vehicle was being blown across the road. It is hard to explain, but imagine a 50-foot wall of thick dust in front of you, and then bottom 10 feet of the wall was being blown across the road in front of you, while other 40 was just kind of hanging in the air. Anyways, I was just coasting slowly and kind of driving up to where the cloud was blowing, and another voice in my head, not mine, and pretty loudly said, "Shut off your engine and roll through the cloud." I almost peed my pants. I was so shocked, but I did what the voice said. I shut it off and put it in neutral, rolling through the cloud to the other side. So, what happened was a propane delivery truck had plowed into the mountainside. We found out later the driver was drunk. The top of the tank safety valve had blown off and the propane was blowing the cloud across the road. I think the voice in my head was getting me to shut off the engine to stop anything from igniting the propane. I did not smell any of the propane stink, but someone told me later that the sulfur scent is added later so people can tell if there's a gas leak. The whole road was shut down for a day or two after that. Anyways, to me this was 100% real in each instance. I do not normally hear voices in my head. I have no doubt in each of these situations I would have been dead. So, one hand I feel like my life's been saved repeatedly for a reason, but on the other hand, I'm just some jerk not really doing anything at all useful with my life to warrant such intervention, but who knows? Maybe one day I'll save the world. Here's hoping. A good friend of mine told me this story years ago. He's the stereotypical old big bad trucker. I've seen some weird stuff with him while driving in South Texas along the border. He never batted an eye, but while telling me this story, he had goosebumps and a concerned expression, which, from this guy, is about the equivalent of a trembling lip and shit-stained pants. I'll tell this story in first person as he told it to me. Years ago, in the late 90s, I was up on my way from the house, Central Texas, headed to Laredo to pick up a load. It was early morning, around 4 or 5. I'd just come off a string of days at home, so I know I wasn't tired. I am on one of those 2-lane winding roads in the absolute middle of dumb duck nowhere when I see something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams. At first, I just thought it was roadkill, as is usual the case. As I get closer, I see that it is roadkill and there's someone crouching over the deer carcass. I remember thinking either this guy taking the antlers as a trophy or he's ducking sick. As I got closer still, I can now see that this guy's eating the deer. He's pulling chunks of the meat from the stomach and bringing them to his face. At this point, he stops mid-motion and looks up to me. Not at my truck, but at me. He, or it, stands up, and that's when I see it's ducking huge, brown and covered in hair. I remember thinking at this point, oh shit. This thing is standing on the tiny shoulder looking at me. By this point, maybe 3 seconds have passed and I'm about to point in the road he's standing at. I didn't even think of stopping. In fact, I'm starting to lay on it and get the heck out of there. As I'm passing it, it's looking at me again, not the truck. It's looking through the driver's side windshield directly at me. He obviously has the intelligence to know that there's a driver in here and knows where I'm sitting. As I start to pass him, I can still see its head above the hood and an old needle-nosed Pete. Old truck drivers where the hood goes straight out from the windshield, known for being tall and difficult to see around. This thing is huge. I remember seeing what looked like human intelligence in its eyes. It scared the heck out of me. I've been to a few towns that just fell a little off. Like maybe Twin Peaks was written after a visit there. I lost quite a bit of my memory due to an illness, but I clearly remember stopping in small Midwest town for an emergency bathroom break with a friend of mine. We were both naive, city-dwelling 18-year-old girls. The porta potty of the freeway near some dilapidated building was too gross for us to use, so we drove up ways to the main street. The only thing open at 2 p.m. on a Thursday was a craft shop, which my friend rushed into while I waited in the car. A giant bold man with a crazed look in his eye came barreling out of nowhere and started slapping on the side of our little Fiat, yelling to me that I was too pretty not to smile. I tried texting my friend to warn her, but had no service. He circled the car a few times, acting mean and drunk, shaking the entire vehicle, and was close to breaking the window. I'm no stranger to crackheads fried out of their mind, but this felt different. He seemed to have given up and walked a few steps away. My friend came out, noticed the look on my face, and we peeled out of there. He chased our car for longer than expected. Once I had cell service, I looked up the town and the time, and I believe it was almost 25% felons with a population of around 300. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up, and it's always stuck with me. Particularly on long drives when I'm feeling a bit sleepy. The first time I remember hearing it was after I asked him if angels were real. I was probably 7 or 8. He drove truck decades ago, before I was born and before labor law limits around brakes were more standard. I'm assuming it's different now. He'd fairly regularly accept calls that would extend his shift to where he was driving 24 to 36 hours or more, without a break longer than a quick bathroom or fast food shop. My dad has a pretty mathematical brain. He's the type to make up logic puzzles out of something totally mundane just for fun. Whenever we were driving around town, he'd regularly ask me things like how long would it take us to get home from the store if we were going 30 miles per hour but had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens were crossing the road, etc. He'd come up with similar questions for himself while he was driving. It involved stuff he was seeing like the odometer, mileage markers, the time, and then he could test his speed based on the equation. One night, after having already driven a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes getting droopier, and the whole roll down the window and blast the music up thing did not seem to be helping much. It was a rainy night, on a pretty windy mountain without a shoulder to pull over safely. So, he started doing those logic games out to keep alert and awake. He was saying something to the effect of, quote, I just passed mile marker 146, so what time will I be if I reach 200 if I'm going 55 miles per hour? Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and felt his head do the nod-jerk thing, which he woke up with a gasp. He opened his eyes to see he was driving straight towards mile marker 158, which would have sent his whole truck tumbling down a random mountain ravine. He was able to correct the course safely back, but it was a matter of seconds between the reality and certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy mountain road going 60 miles per hour, only to wake up right at the last moment between life and death. This story usually ends with him tearing up and saying, I don't know if there's angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have the able to understand. If I wouldn't have woken up right when I did, you kids would not be here today, and that's something that feels pretty close to spiritual.